Nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world, and then shall the end come.
Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?
Our lesson today is the seven trumpets of the book of Revelation. There are three groups of seven found in the book of Revelation: seven seals, seven trumpets, and seven vials. These make up the skeletal structure of the book of Revelation. The seven seals are the long story ending at Armageddon. The seven trumpets are the shorter story also ending at Armageddon, and the seven vials are the real short story ending at Armageddon. Now we know the seven vials do not actually take place until after the mark of the beast is administered. We know this because when the first vial is unleashed, the Bible tells us very clearly that it will be unleashed upon the people that have taken the mark of the beast. So from that, we know that it will all be enacted at the time of the very end. Now, not only are there skeletal structures in the book of Revelation of three sevens, seven seals, seven trumpets, seven vials, but in addition to that, the book of Revelation has what we call parenthetical chapters. This is sort of like color commentary. While we're telling the main overview, every once in a while there's a chapter thrown in that will tell you, for example, chapter number 12 of Revelation talks about a war in heaven when Satan is cast down and confined to the earth for the final 3.5 years. Revelation number 13 gives us a view of the one world government and the Antichrist that heads that one world government, of the one world religion and the false prophet who will be the leader of that one world religion, and also the mark of the beast, the economic system of the end time one world governmental system. So that's when we understand the book of Revelation, that really helps us to understand. If we understand the skeletal structure of the three sevens, seven seals, seven trumpets, seven vials, and then we also understand other chapters are thrown in order to give us a fuller understanding of what this is really all about. Now we're focusing today on the seven trumpets. It begins in Revelation chapter number 8, verse number 6. Listen to it. And the seven angels which had the seven trumpets prepared themselves to sound. Now when we deal with these seven trumpets, we're not going to start from 1 through 7, because the way God helped me to understand the seven trumpets, He first of all helped me to understand trumpet number 3. And I feel like that if that's the way God helped me to understand, that's probably the best way for me to try to help you understand. So let's look at the third trumpet first. It's Revelation chapter 8, verse 10 through 11. And the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp. And it fell upon the third part of the rivers and upon the fountains of waters. And the name of the star is called wormwood. And the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died because of the waters. So don't forget wormwood, and don't forget that many men died because of the waters. Now, I'll never forget how this all came to me. What happened was, it was back in 1995, and I was working on the manual for our course called Understanding the End Time. It was the first edition of that course. And I had heard a rumor that wormwood meant Chernobyl, that the word Chernobyl was the Russian word for wormwood. But when you deal with Bible prophecy, you hear all kinds of theories. And I had learned not just to accept everything that came my way. I mean, I've got 75 Antichrists in my filing cabinet right now. I mean, so many people, a lot of people contacted me and said, I know Ronald Reagan is the Antichrist because his name is Ronald Wilson Reagan. Ronald has 6 letters. Wilson has 6 letters. Reagan has 6 letters. Therefore, his name is 666, and that's the number of the name of the Antichrist. Well, obviously he was not the Antichrist, but I get all kinds of theories. So when I hear something, a possible explanation of one of the prophecies of the Bible, I listen, but I just don't swallow it hook, line, and sinker, because I found out over time that that's not the best thing to do. So I was working on my manual for the first Understanding End Time production, and everything was flowing that day. I was sitting there, I was typing, and everything was really going great. And you know, when writers are writing, sometimes it flows and sometimes it doesn't. Well, this particular day it was flowing. My door was shut to my office. I was all alone. I was excited. I was behind on my deadlines, but I was catching up, and so I was really feeling good. And as I was writing, nothing about wormwood, nothing about Chernobyl, nothing about the third trumpet. It was like something spoke to me. I thought it was God, actually. It just spoke to me and said, you know that rumor you heard about wormwood being Chernobyl? I want you to check that out. And I remember thinking in my mind, now I'm all by myself in my office. I remember thinking in my mind, wait a minute. I'm busy. I'm doing good. Everything is flowing. I don't want to stop and do that right now. And furthermore, you know, 3 weeks at the library trying to dig out this piece of information, I just don't have time for it right now. I have to get this manual finished. And it's like God spoke to me and said, it won't take you any time. Just pick up the phone, call the library, they'll do the research for you. Well, as I thought about this, I was really a little bit frustrated, to tell you the truth. But since I thought it might be the voice of God, I thought, well, I probably should do this. So I opened the drawer to my desk, and I pulled out the phone book and looked up the number, called the library, asked for the reference librarian. And I said, ma'am, this is Pastor Irvin Baxter, and I've heard a rumor that the Russian word for wormwood is Chernobyl. Is there any way you could check that out for me and let me know if that's true or not? She said, oh, it is true. Because you see, the Russians used wormwood for medicinal purposes. It turned their tongues black, and the Russian word for black is Chernin. And consequently, they begin to call wormwood Chernobyl. And she rattled off the awfulest bunch of information you've ever seen in your life. And so I was taken aback by this. I was not prepared for her to just answer me off the cuff like that. And I said, well, ma'am, I'm going to be writing an article about this. Could I get some documentation, some books, some page numbers? She said, I'll call you back. She called me back 20 minutes later. She had the books, she had the page numbers, and I was really wowed by this time. One reference she had was the Dictionary of the Russian Language, and it had as a definition Chernobylic, and it said a variety of absinthe, which was in parentheses wormwood, with a red, brown, or deep purple stem. There it was in a Russian dictionary, and it referred to wormwood under the heading Chernobylnik. Well, I was really impressed. Well, after she talked to me probably 10 minutes, and finally it was time to go, and I thanked her very much. I said, but before I let you go, I have to know something. It's not normal that you would have known this all off the top of your head. How did you know all this? She said, oh, I'm working on my doctorate in Russian right now, and I've been studying these things. Well, needless to say, I was in awe, because I felt like God told me to call the library, that they would do the research for me, and in 30 minutes time or so, I had the information that I needed. Well, what happened was, from there on, I began to do more research. I found a book called The Truth About Chernobyl, and I read that book. It was written by one of the scientists that was there. It was very interesting. But let's take a look real quick at the actual nuclear power plant of Chernobyl. It's located in the Ukraine, actually. This was when the Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. And the town where most of the workers lived was a town called Pripyat. There was about 40,000 people that lived there. Now, you're seeing a picture of the power plant before the explosion. And what happened was let's see if I can go through this with you very carefully because it's important. It was on April the 26th of 1986 at 1:26 a.m. in the morning. A Russian scientist was in charge of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant at the time, and he decided to conduct some experiments. In order to do this particular experiment, he had to disable some of the safety features. But he thought it was okay, and so he did. He disabled the safety fixtures, and then he gave the command to raise the rods, which allowed the nuclear process to begin. Well, he was watching his meters, but he didn't catch it in time. Within about 30 seconds or so, the power plant began to overheat, the reactor began to overheat, and suddenly there was this powerful explosion that took place. And you're going to actually see a part of the explosion. The first explosion knocked the concrete lid off of the power plant. The concrete lid weighed about 2 million pounds. It knocked it off the power plant. It came down cocked. And then the second explosion drove a nuclear cloud 1 mile into the air. And leaving the lid cocked, it left the atmosphere open to a full nuclear fire. Well, little did they know at the time that they had just witnessed the worst nuclear disaster in the history of the world. Before it was over with, there would be 10 times as much nuclear radiation released at Chernobyl as was released at the bombing of Hiroshima in World War II. Okay. Well, now, here's what happened next. The workers, they didn't know what was going on. They heard this big explosion. They ran down to the source of the sound. 2 of the workers pulled the door open and found themselves staring full-faced into a nuclear fire. It was so incredibly hot when they opened that door that it thrust them back and they fell to the floor where they knew the coolest air would be. And they laid there until the heat somewhat dissipated, because now the lid is off of the nuclear reactor and all the heat is going up. They were finally able to get up and they made their way back down to the nurses' station. It was about a block they had to walk. By the time they arrived, their skin was hanging off of their arms in ribbons. Both of those technicians died within a very short amount of time. Now, that's not all that happened. Immediately, because of the level of this emergency, fire trucks came from everywhere. And when the fire trucks came, they fought this fire, many of them not realizing that they were actually signing their own death warrant by being there. They're fighting a full nuclear fire. There were fire trucks there. There were helicopters that came in. And you can see some of the monuments here built to the people who bravely fought that fire, even though many of them died within 30 days or so. And the ones who did survive suffered all kinds of ramifications of their exposure to this high level of radiation. Well, as time went along, all of the equipment was brought in. The fire trucks that were brought in to fight the nuclear fire became so contaminated with radiation that they had to bring bulldozers in and bury these fire trucks. And then in the process, the bulldozers absorbed so much radiation that they had to bring in more bulldozers to bury the bulldozers. It was an horrific thing. And furthermore, they're fighting the fire with helicopters, and you can see some of the helicopters that are still in the area, and they were dumping water onto the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in an attempt to put out the fire. And you can see another picture here. Look at this. It's a graveyard of radioactive vehicles. And then at Chernobyl, it became a ghost town. Pripyat was the town of about 40,000 people where most of the workers lived. Well, it's a no man's land today. It has been declared off limits because no one can live there. Everything is contaminated. The vegetation, much of it does not grow there anymore. And to live there would be to live at risk of your own life. Now, the wild animals, they come there, but that's about it. Now, about this time, I was writing an article on this subject, and I went to the library so I could have solitude, get away from my office. And the place I was going to write was behind the video desk. And as I went behind this video desk, I passed the video clerk, and I said to him, just on a lark, do you have any videos about Chernobyl? Because I was still in the learning process. And he said, I think I have one. He brought it to me. It was put out by the Humanities. And they had a machine there where I could look at it on the spot. And I was so curious about this because I was writing about it at the time. So I went over there and I pushed in the video and I began to watch. And it's amazing what I saw when I pushed in this video, because right on the front came up Chernobyl, the bitter taste of wormwood. Now, this was not put out by a religious organization. It was not put out by a prophecy ministry. And yet here they somehow had associated Chernobyl with wormwood, and the prophecy said that a star by the name of wormwood was cast into the earth. Now, that's not all it said, because it had many other things to tell me in this video. The main message of this video was that the waters made the Chernobyl nuclear accident so deadly. Here's what happened. Let me see if I can tell you the story. When the nuclear cloud was driven 1 mile into the air, the winds caught the cloud and they carried it first of all into Sweden, then into Italy, then into Germany, then into Great Britain. And during this time, it rained incessantly. I do not know whether the nuclear explosion had anything to do with the rain or not, but it rained for about 4 or 5 days. The result was it brought all of the nuclide cesium-137 down to the earth, and everywhere the rains hit, it created what's called brownouts. There's many places in Europe where nothing will grow for 100 years. Furthermore, the rivers filled up with this nuclide, cesium-137, and anybody that drank this water, they ingested this nuclide. Well, what happens when cesium-137 is ingested, it goes to your bone marrow. And the interesting thing is, it has a half-life of 30 years. Now, watch this. The rain came down, filled the waters of Europe, and it was radioactive. And everything it touched became radioactive. There were reindeer being raised for domestic consumption in Europe, about 100,000 of them. All of them had to be killed. And you can even see the workers as they were trying to control this unprecedented disaster. They actually had Geiger counters measuring the level of radioactivity. It goes way beyond the safe zone here. It was an accident that was unprecedented. There's never been anything like it in the history of the world. And so why should we be surprised that it's located in the prophecy of the Bible? Now, cesium-137 has a half-life of about 30 years. And many of the children especially were affected because they ingested this. And one of the things that cesium-137 does, it attacks your thyroid gland. And in the area of Pripyat, in that area around the Ukraine, the thyroid cancer is about 248 times the normal thyroid cancer rate, and many people are still suffering. Altogether, as a result of the Chernobyl nuclear accident of April the 26th of 1986, about 125,000 people have died. The scientists and the doctors estimate that around 2 million people are infected. And eventually what happens is when cesium-137 lays in your bone marrow, it will eventually cause a person to have cancer. So it's very interesting to see what happens. Okay, so the third trumpet sounded on April the 26th of 1986. This being true, when did the first trumpet sound? When did the second trumpet sound? Because obviously they would be before the third trumpet. And I asked myself that question. Well, let's look now at the sounding of the second trumpet. It's found in Revelation chapter number 8, verse 8 and 9. And the second angel sounded, and as it were, a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea. And the third part of the sea became blood, and the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and the third part of the ships were destroyed. And when I went back to study after I felt like I understood the third trumpet, the Chernobyl nuclear accident, when I went back to study these others, I said, a third part of the ships were destroyed? That's never happened. I would surely know about that. And so I thought, well, maybe I'm off. Maybe I'm misunderstanding something here. However, about a year later, I was thinking about everything, and my mind went to World War II. Now, World War II is the greatest disaster the world has ever known. 52 million people died there. And I thought, I wonder how many ships participated in World War II and how many of them were sunk. So I asked my research assistant, Kathy, I said, Kathy, go to the library, see if you can find out how many ships participated in World War II and how many were sunk. She came back about 3 days later, and she laid on my desk the statistics she had dug up, and I looked at them, and I looked at Kathy, and I said, Kathy, I didn't intend for you to cook the books. I want the truth. Well, what she showed me was that there were 105,127 ships that participated in World War II, and 36,387 of them were sunk. Well, I quickly did the calculation. It's about 1/3 on the money. And I said, Kathy, are you sure? She said, the librarian helped me. This is the way it was. 1/3 of the ships were destroyed. Well, the rest of the prophecy says that there would be a great mountain burning with fire cast into the sea. I had seen pictures of nuclear explosions, and they looked like a huge mountain on fire. And I thought, why should it be incredible that the first nuclear bomb dropped on the human race should be in the book of Revelation? And why should I think it's incredible that World War II, the greatest war the world's ever known by far, 52 million dead? And that's when I realized that in this second trumpet prophecy, I was seeing here the nuclear explosion at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and also 1/3 of the ships were destroyed. I became quickly convinced that the second trumpet was World War II. My next question then was, okay, well, what's World War I then? So back to the Bible, Revelation 8, verse number 7, and the first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth. And the third part of the trees was burnt up, and all green grass was burnt up. I thought, okay, if the second trumpet is World War II, the first trumpet, could it be World War I? Because up until the 20th century, we never had a war with 1 million fatalities. And World War I comes along, they called it the Great War, and there were 8.2 million dead. It was totally unprecedented. So could that possibly be the first trumpet? What does this mean? Hail and fire mingled with blood. And I thought about the new implements of warfare, the bombs, the huge guns. And also it says all green grass was burned up. And I thought I remembered in school studying about a thing called the scorched earth policy. And what happened was most of the battle occurred in World War I between France and Germany, and there was an area in there where the policy was don't leave anything, burn everything up. That way, if you lose the territory, you leave no resources for the enemy to live off of the ground. So don't leave the crops, don't leave any green thing, and they called it the scorched earth policy. Well, after I studied for a while, I came to the conclusion that the first trumpet was probably World War I. Of course, that's when biological weapons were first used. It was horrendous. Our men and the Allied troops and the German troops all engaging in unprecedented warfare. It was absolutely terrible what they went through as they fought this horrible battle. So when I looked at the prophecy and looked at what happened in World War I, it made sense to me that World War I would be the sounding of the first trumpet. Okay, now let's summarize everything. Now let's look at it. So this is the overview of the first three trumpets. First trumpet, World War I, 8.2 million dead. Prior to this, there had never been one war with 1 million dead. In 6,000 years of recorded human history, not one war with 1 million dead. All of a sudden, we have this great war, 8.2 million dead. Then, second trumpet, World War II, 52 million dead. 1/3 of the ships destroyed. A great mountain burning with fire. Everything seemed to fit. And then, of course, the third trumpet, Chernobyl. This is where God opened my understanding first. I mean, I had always been taught that all the trumpets would exist in a final 7-year period. But by that time, God had changed my mind because there's really no proof for that. That's a theory that's embraced, but it's not true. So when I saw this third trumpet, Chernobyl, that happened on April the 26th of 1986, and the word Chernobyl means wormwood. If you were reading a Ukrainian Bible, you would actually read a star by the name of Chernobyl was cast into the earth. I've actually had Ukrainian people come to me since I began to teach this and open their Bibles and say, look, right here it is. It says Chernobyl. Well, that's pretty astounding. So here we have the third trumpet, and the Chernobyl accident was the world's worst nuclear accident, 10 times as much radiation released at Chernobyl as was released at any other, by Hiroshima or by Nagasaki. So once I saw all this, I realized I was looking at something amazing. In our next segment, we're going to look at trumpets 4, 5, 6, and 7. Don't miss it. Now, in our last segment of End of the Age, we began our study of the seven trumpets. We learned that the first trumpet was World War I, the second trumpet, World War II, and the third trumpet was the nuclear accident at Chernobyl in 1986, when 10 times as much radiation was unleashed into the air than was unleashed at the bombing of Hiroshima. Today, we will learn about trumpets 4, 5, 6, and 7. Now, I'm taking a little bit of liberty here again in order to effectively communicate with you, because the fifth trumpet helps us to understand the fourth trumpet. So we're going to go to the fifth trumpet first. The account is Revelation 9, verse 1 and 2. It states there, "And the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth. And to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace. And the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit." Now, I'll never forget, way back in 1990, 1991, Saddam Hussein, who was, of course, the president of Iraq, he decided he wanted to invade Kuwait. He wanted to take control of the oil riches of Kuwait. Already, Iraq was very rich in oil. But now then, if he was able to take Kuwait, he would be that much richer, because he had dreams of rebuilding Babylon. He actually had launched an effort to rebuild the city of Babylon. He actually had pictures of himself taken. He had a uniform made to look like Nebuchadnezzar way back in the Old Testament in 586 BC when he destroyed Jerusalem. Saddam Hussein had dreams of destroying Jerusalem again and getting rid of the nation of Israel. So he actually had a uniform made for himself that looked like Nebuchadnezzar, and he actually stood in a chariot and had his picture taken. So he thought that if he could take control of the oil riches of Kuwait, adding that to what he now controlled, that it would enable him to have power, and he could become the premier power of the Middle East. So when he invaded Kuwait in the fall of 1990, when that happened, immediately President George Herbert Walker Bush, our president at the time, went to the United Nations, asked for a resolution against Saddam Hussein. The UN passed the resolution, and 29 member nations devoted either troops or military supplies to the battle against Saddam Hussein. So the coalition forces, the world community, went against Saddam Hussein, and they began to drive him back out of Kuwait. Now, Hussein thought he had a green light from the United States of America to take this action. Now then, he's very angry. So as he knows he's going to be forced out of Kuwait, he cannot stand before the firepower of the United States of America and all of our allies. So he knows he's going to have to leave, but he's not going to go easy. He decides that he will set 700 of the world's richest oil wells ablaze. The oil wells of Kuwait are very productive. And so he decided to set 700 oil wells ablaze, and he did. Now, when they begin to burn, they actually block the sun and the sky for over 3 months. I want you to see, we have a clip from the video, The Fires of Kuwait, and I actually want you to take a look at some of this footage right now. Watch this. Now, you're looking at pictures in the daytime, but it looks like it's midnight. Notice that the firefighters are there. They brought firefighters from all over the world. The fires were so hot that they actually would reach 2,000 degrees, and it was very difficult for the firefighters to fight these fires, and they had to even spray water on their fire trucks continually to keep the metal of the fire trucks from melting. And so for 3 long months, these fires belched smoke into the atmosphere. I have another shot here for you to see of Kuwait at noontime. This is another picture. I think this appeared in one of the magazines. And you're seeing the sky and the sun was blocked out by reason of the smoke. Now, why is this so important? Because the prophecy says this, and I know of not one more incident in all human history that could fulfill this particular prophecy. The Bible specifically says that the sun and the sky were darkened by reason of the smoke that came out of the bottomless pit. Now, if the oil's coming out of the earth, then maybe that teaches us the bottomless pit is in the middle of the earth. Let's look at the rest of the passage. Revelation 9, verse 3. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power. And the shapes of the locust were like unto horses prepared unto battle, and on their heads were as it were crowns like gold, and their faces were as the faces of men. And they had hair as the hair of women, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions, and they had breastplates as it were breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots of many horses running to battle. Okay, what is John saying here? Remember, this is 2,000 years ago. But he's seeing locusts with breastplates of iron, with faces of men. The sound of their wings was the sound of many chariots or many horses running to battle. What do you think John was seeing? Was he seeing helicopters? Was he seeing jet airplanes? All this is written in symbols. He had never seen a helicopter. He had never seen a jet airplane. Had no clue what they were. But he said these are locusts. And they got breastplates of iron, but they have the face of men, and the sound of their wings is the sound of many chariots going to battle. Take a look here at what he may have seen in his vision. I don't know whether this is what he saw. This is one helicopter and how it appeared in one particular shot. Take a look at these helicopters. You know, when boys or girls are in the service and they are pilots of helicopters, sometimes they paint up their helicopters to make them interesting. Look at this, mouth of lions. Does this look like locusts to you? I mean, you got to admit, this look a lot like locust. And take a look at this next shot, because here you see helicopters, breastplates of iron, faces of men. It appears to me that that's what John was seeing, and he was talking about warfare in the 20th century. Now, that's not all the prophecy, however. Let's go a little further. In verse 11, it continues the prophecy, and it says, and they had a king over them, these warriors, these armies, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon. Now, if you look up in a dictionary, it defines both the Hebrew Abaddon as the destroyer, and the Greek Apollyon means the destroyer. Some translations in the Bible actually say they had a king over them named the destroyer. Now, way back in 1991, when all this was taking place, I was a subscriber to the German Tribune at the time, and I'll never forget receiving my German Tribune. It was the March 10th of 1991 edition, and I was reading an article about Saddam Hussein and about all that was happening in the Gulf at the time, and the reporter called him Saddam, quote, the destroyer Hussein. Well, I'd already been wondering about these fires and about the possibility of this prophecy, and I knew that Abaddon and Apollyon meant the destroyer, and here they called Saddam the destroyer Hussein. Now, I had reached no conclusions at the time, but I was wondering, I'll just confess to you. Okay, well, it's about a little while later, actually quite a bit later, 6 years later, in 1997, I still was not certain about all this. but I was a subscriber to the international edition of the Jerusalem Post at the time. I was scheduled to preach out of town one evening, and my wife was going to drive me. And as we were getting ready to leave, my Jerusalem Post had just arrived. She said to me, "You want to take your Post along? You might want to read it on the way." And I said, "Well, sure, let's do that." So she's driving, and I'm sitting there reading the Jerusalem Post. And there was a particular story. It was a human interest story back in the middle of the Jerusalem Post. And I was reading this story. It was about the last family out of Baghdad, the last Jewish family out of Baghdad. And the Jerusalem Post was doing an interview with this family that had just arrived in Jerusalem. But what I found so interesting was the lady relating the story was telling about how when Saddam's mother was pregnant with Saddam, that she was having a horrible pregnancy. And the Iraqi doctors recommended an abortion. However, she didn't want to get an abortion, so she moved to the section of Baghdad where the finest doctors were available. They were the Jewish doctors. And the Jewish doctors nursed her through her pregnancy with Saddam Hussein. And in the Jerusalem Post, it said when he was born, she decided to name him Saddam because Saddam means destroyer. And he almost destroyed her. I looked at that absolutely stunned. And that was sort of the icing on the cake for me. That's when I decided, since I found out that the Arabic word for Saddam actually means destroyer. Now, do you understand what I'm saying to you? I'm saying to you, in the Bible, it said a man by the name of Destroyer is going to unleash the oil fields, the bottomless pit, and the sun and the air will be darkened by reason of smoke. I don't know. There were a couple of things in the prophecy I didn't understand yet, but there was too much here for me to deny. And that's when I reached the conclusions that actually the fifth trumpet sounded in 1990, 1991. Okay, now we got to get back to the fourth trumpet. Let's go now to Revelation chapter 8, verse number 12. It states there, "And the fourth angel sounded, and the third part of the sun was smitten, and the third part of the moon, and the third part of the stars, so as the third part of them was darkened, and the day shone not for a third part of it, and the night likewise." Okay, what can this be? Now, this is all that's given to us for the fourth trumpet. A third part of the stars, the sun, the moon was smitten, and the sun didn't shine for a third part of the day. The moon did not shine for one third part of the night. Well, I just tell you, I was totally stalled on this one. I didn't know what this meant. Now, I did know, however, that there was another prophecy in the Bible given by Jesus Christ himself. This is Matthew chapter 24, verse 22. And it says there, "And except those days should be shortened, there should be no flesh saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened." So what do I make of all this? I didn't know the answer. And I had a lot of people, when I would teach the third trumpet, and the second trumpet, and the first trumpet, and the fifth trumpet, everybody said, "Yeah, what about the fourth?" And I had to say, "I don't know," because I didn't know. Well, my wife is one of my best fans, and also she's one of my biggest critics. So consequently, she was driving along one day, and she was thinking about the fact that I didn't understand the fourth trumpet, and she wanted me to understand these things to be able to deal with all these issues. And so she said to God as she was driving along in the car, she said, "God, how are you going to shorten the days?" Well, let me back up just a moment. She came home that day and she said, "God spoke to me today." I said, "He did." Well, I thought she was setting me up because she'd been out shopping, that God spoke to her to buy a new dress, and so she was maybe just kidding me. But I saw she was serious, and since we'd been married like 30 years at the time, she had never said that to me before. Not in all of our married days. She had never looked at me and said, "God spoke to me." So I sobered up and I took it serious. And I said to her, "So what did he say?" She said, "Well, I asked him, 'God, how are you going to shorten the days?' And he said, 'I already have.'" And she said, "I said back to God as I'm driving down the road, 'Well, how, Lord?' And he spoke back to her in her mind, 'I've speeded everything up, but men don't realize it. It's already a done deal.'" Well, I thought about that for a while. And I started studying some more, and I thought, well, God, if you're going to shorten the days, are you going to shorten the number of days, which some people think, or are you going to shorten the length of each day? Well, I decided he had to shorten the length of each day, because if he shortened the number of days, it would mess the Bible up. Because in Daniel chapter 12, verse 11 and 12, it says, and from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. So from the abomination of desolation till the culmination of everything, till the Battle of Armageddon, is going to be 1,290 days. And then it says, blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1,335th day. So if God would shorten the number of days, then this scripture would have to be changed. And the Bible says, thy word, O Lord, is forever settled in heaven. So I was convinced from my knowledge of the Bible and from my knowledge of God that he was not going to change the number of days. So the answer obviously was that he must be going to shorten the length of each day. And really the prophecy of Revelation says that the sun would not shine for 1/3 part of the day. The moon would not shine for 1/3 part of the night. So I thought, okay. Well, then I said to my wife, Judy, I said, but babe, this can't be, because if the days are shorter and the clocks are moving faster, men are still able to run the 4-minute mile. Now, this was my engineering background sitting in here, my mathematical background, and I said, you know, if the clocks are moving faster, the mile is still as long as it was, and men can't run any faster. So that means it should be taking them 5 minutes at least to run a 4-minute mile. And she looked at me as only she can, as only a woman can, and she said, I can answer your question, but I still know God spoke to me, as though that settles it. Well, about a week or so later, she and I were in a restaurant, and there was a professor from Richmond, Indiana there that followed a lot of our teachings, and he happened to be at the restaurant. And so Judy went up to him and said, hey, she began to tell him about what she felt like God spoke to her. But she said, Irvin says that it won't work because men couldn't run the 4-minute mile anymore, and they still are. Well, the professor looked at both of us and said, oh, that's no problem. Don't you understand Einstein's theory of relativity? Well, sure, I read all that for breakfast every morning, right? Well, he said, don't you understand that time and speed are relative one to the other? So when one speeds up, the other speeds up. So I'm standing there trying to absorb all this, and my wife is looking like the cat's meow. You know, I told you, here's the college professor. He's backing me up. Well, about a week or so later, I was on the phone with another friend who was a pretty intelligent guy, and I was talking to him about it. He said, oh, that's no problem. I was talking about the 4-minute mile again. He said, that's no problem. Don't you understand Einstein's theory of relativity? So what do? I'm off to the bookstore, and I buy 2 or 3 books on Einstein's theory of relativity. I haven't read them yet, but I'm going to get around to it one of these days. But anyway, it certainly, since I was convinced the 3rd trumpet sounded and the 5th trumpet sounded, it seemed like to me that maybe my wife, in fact, was right, as much as I hated to admit it. Okay, so when did the 4th trumpet sound? If it did sound, when did it sound? Well, we know the 3rd trumpet sounded in 1986, and we know the 5th trumpet sounded in 1991. So is there any major event between 1986 and 1991 that could maybe be related to the shortening of the days? Well, back in 1968, God allowed me to understand that the Berlin Wall was going to come down. The 2 Germanys would be reunited. I actually put it in a book that I published in 1986. I stated that the Berlin Wall was coming down, the 2 Germanys would be reunited, and that would be the beginning of the New World Order. Well, that was going to be a turning point. As a matter of fact, that's what prompted me to start End Time Magazine, because I felt like that was really the beginning of the end time. Well, furthermore, 10 years after 1989, Merrill Lynch actually put out a full-page ad in USA Today, and the title said, "The world is 10 years old today. Congratulations. Happy birthday." And they were actually stating that the new world began when the Berlin Wall fell on November the 9th of 1989. Well, recently I was listening to a speech by Mr. Tony Blair. He has a new foundation called the Tony Blair Foundation. It's the combination of faith and globalization. And he said that globalization began with the fall of the Berlin Wall. So it's very much a pivotal event. And I said, well, God, maybe that's when you speeded everything up. And I think that probably is correct. Okay, well, let's look at the sixth trumpet now. Revelation 9, verse 13. And the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice saying, loose the four angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. And the four angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour, a day, a month, and a year, for to slay the third part of men. And the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000, and I heard the number of them. Okay, this prophecy tells us three things. There's going to be a war that will kill 1/3 of mankind. That's verse 15. 1/3 of mankind, that's 2.3 billion people. Big prophecy. And the war is going to start from the Euphrates River. And the Euphrates River is in the Middle East. And the number of the army that will participate, one of the armies will be 200,000. That's an army of 200 million. Okay, now let's make sure we understand about this war. It starts from the Euphrates River. There are four angels bound in the great river Euphrates. And when they're loosed, it triggers this war that will kill 1/3 of mankind. There'll be a 200 million man army involved. Let's take a look real quick at the Euphrates River. Notice here, it starts in Turkey, down through Syria, down all the way through Iraq, emptying out in the Persian Gulf, where the border of Iran and Iraq meet together. Now, this is where this war will begin from. And I don't know whether you've noticed or not, but there's a lot of turmoil in the Middle East right now as I speak to you, and it's been that way for a long time and undoubtedly will continue. So the Bible says that this war that kills 1/3 of mankind is going to start right here in the Middle East. Now, what else do we know? We know it starts from the Euphrates River, and the United States of America has 50,000 troops stationed there right now. Now, we're making this video. Here we are in the middle of 2011. We've got 50,000 troops there right now. You can see the American troops there. The other thing we know about this Euphrates River is that it's a 100% Islamic river. Now, what does that tell us? If the Euphrates River is going to emanate from there, it's obvious that Islam, with its 1.5, 1.6 billion people, will be involved in this war. So this is a prediction of a war that's going to kill 1/3 of mankind. What do we know for sure? We know that China has a population. She could field 200 million soldiers. Islam has a bigger population. They also could field 1/3 or 200 million soldiers. They have enough population that they could field 200 million soldiers. So will the army of 200 million soldiers be Islam or China? Probably both, because if you're going to kill 1/3 of mankind, you're going to have to kill a lot of people. So anyway, that's the sixth trumpet prophecy of this war that's coming, and it could happen really at any moment. By the time you're watching this DVD, we may be in the middle of it. I don't know for sure. I know for positive, though, this war has to happen before the Great Tribulation begins. So that gives us a little bit of guide of what the Bible says is going to happen. Okay, now to the seventh trumpet. Revelation 11, verse 15 through 18. And the seventh angel sounded, and there were great voices in heaven saying, the kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. And the nations were angry, and thy wrath is come, and the time of the dead, the nations were angry, the time of the dead, that they should be judged, and that thou shouldest give reward unto thy servants the prophets, and to the saints, and them that fear thy name, small and great, shouldest destroy them that destroy the earth. So what happens under the seventh trumpet? The kingdoms of this world become the kingdoms of our Lord and his Christ. His wrath is come, rewards given to the saints. This is the second coming of Jesus Christ. The Apostle Paul taught us about the last trumpet in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 51 through 53. Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep. That means we will not all die. But we shall all be changed. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. There it is. For the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible must put on incorruption. This mortal must put on immortality. So what's going to happen is the people who are dead, who have been born again, will be raised from the dead. And when all of us that are still on the earth serving God, we will be changed from mortal to immortality in the twinkling of an eye. Then we will be caught up together with the dead who have raised. Together we will meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. Now in 1 Thessalonians chapter number 4, verse 16, we have another account of the last trump. For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, with the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. Now the most critical thing that we're going to talk about as we close today is the rapture. Romans 8:11 tells us if you want to be a part of the rapture, it says, if the spirit of him that raised up Jesus from the dead dwell in you, he that raised up Christ from the dead shall also quicken your mortal body by his spirit that dwelleth in you. You want to make sure you've received the wonderful gift of the Holy Ghost, because that's the power that will raise you up in that last day.
To continue this series, order Lesson 13, The Second Coming.